Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan and today we're going to be talking about and dialing into Jonathan Huberdeau, now of the Calgary Flames. Yesterday, of course, we posted a video going over the Tkachuk trade and all the different components about it. But this morning, I was thinking about Jonathan Huberdeau and his factor in this trade. And with him only having a year left, we have not heard anything about a possible contract extension. And it does feel like as of right now, there could be a good chance that Huberdeau just leaves in free agency or the Calgary Flames trade him at the NHL trade deadline. But when it comes to Huberdeau, what will end up happening next in his career with the Calgary Flames, and where could he end up going if he were to leave Calgary, potentially in free agency? Watch till the end for the full breakdown and all the trade rumors, and make sure to hit that subscribe button if you are new. 50% of you guys aren't subscribed, so if you like daily hockey content, this channel is the place to be. Now, one of the first pieces of news surrounding the Huberdeau situation in Calgary after the trade came from Andy Strickland, who said this: no extension in place for Jonathan Huberdeau with Calgary. So, again, nothing like what Tkachuk had in Florida, where he was instantly given that 8-year, $9.5 million extension. With the Flames, it feels like they've traded for Huberdeau, and they don't have a backup plan yet. And with him having a 1-year deal left, with him having a $5.9 million cap hit, this is a player that is going to be going into his late 20s and is in his prime and is going to want the most money possible. And it feels like the more we go into this situation, the more likely it feels that Huberdeau might be gone by the end of this year. And going on to a tweet from David Pagnotta, also swirling that possibility as well. As I mentioned a few minutes ago on SiriusXM NHL, some teams have already inquired about Jonathan Huberdeau, already trying to trade for him, wondering if the Flames will consider flipping him. Also, Huberdeau was expecting to hear from Florida on extension talks, didn't happen, and was dealt instead. So some really good info there from David Pagnotta that already, the day after the deal happened, and really, I mean, just a few hours from it actually going down, teams have already inquired, already called the Calgary Flames, seeing the availability on Huberdeau, and it just shows how valuable a player like that is across the league. But there is concern from NHL GMs that the Flames will end up flipping him, and that I think is the most likely situation. Calgary obviously still wants to compete, but I think at the very least, if Calgary is in a position where they're not going to make the playoffs, Huberdeau is one of the most likely flipping assets and one of the more likely players to be traded at next year's deadline. But I gotta say this right now, I would actually not be surprised if Calgary even flips Huberdeau for something before the season starts, or maybe early on in the season. If a team really wants to go after Huberdeau and really wants to capture him, Calgary is a team that wants to use as much leverage as possible, obviously, but they would have more leverage with Huberdeau than they would with Tkachuk, since at least Huberdeau is signed to a deal. But I do feel like it would be interesting, because for Calgary, when we were talking about the trade, I mentioned a little bit in the video how we could maybe see them recoup assets in the deal somehow. And if Huberdeau is a player that Calgary knows they aren't going to re-sign, they might just learn their lesson, let's say, and instead of waiting for players to go into unrestricted free agency or become RFAs like Tkachuk and Gaudreau, they'll end up flipping their players before they can go into free agency or have the chance to sign in free agency. And honestly, I feel like that might be what ends up happening for the Flames. They might get a player like Huberdeau who's on that rental deal and end up flipping him for as much as they humanly can, and then we'd see what that Tkachuk trade truly looks like. If they get a first-round pick, top prospect, another player for Huberdeau, that just means even more assets for the Flames, and even more than they got back for Matthew Tkachuk. And I feel like that's what the Flames are planning here. I feel like, yes, there is a chance they can re-sign him, and they'd love to do that, but I do feel like Calgary, it has their backup plan, and I feel like that is what's needed. If Calgary sucks next year, they're going to have a Huberdeau trade on the table, no doubt. But again, going back to that offseason speculation, what if there's a team out there, maybe there's a team out there like New Jersey Devils, who wants to add another top 6 winger and wants to get somebody big before the season ends up starting? What if they go to Calgary with a humongous offer with a lot of futures? What if they go to Calgary, let's say they still have Jesper Bratt unsigned, let's say they go into training camp and they propose a deal surrounding a Huberdeau extension, and then the Flames get Jesper Bratt and maybe even more players on top of that. I feel like for Calgary, they're in a really interesting position here where they can maximize the potential of this Matthew Tkachuk trade. For me personally, I think this is a team that needs to rebuild and I feel, or at least retool and have these couple of years as building seasons. And if Calgary is able to do that, if they're able to maximize this return, then that could obviously pay dividends. But even if they still want to compete, you could still get amazing players back for Huberdeau, just like they did with Matthew Tkachuk. Honestly, at this point, the sky's the limit for Brad Treliving. I mean, he pulled this off with Matthew Tkachuk, so I have full confidence now that he'll be able to do something with Huberdeau and likely get something back, especially, again, if that trade deadline looms, there will be a little bit lesser options. Huberdeau would be the best player available, no doubt. Now, I will say this, if the Flames make it a priority to re-sign Huberdeau, I feel like there's definitely a chance they can do it. They got $9.3 million of cap space right now, but in the future, it looks a lot better for them. You got Milan Lucic coming off his $5.25 million deal, which brings so much cap relief off the books. And even though you will have to factor in the big Mangiapane signing into this, and again, a pretty big extension for Huberdeau, likely a maybe $4.5 million raise on top of what he's already making, you'd subtract that Milan Lucic deal, and you also have a pretty interesting situation in MacKenzie Weeger, who will also be a UFA after next year at $3.25 million. And you got a lot of RFAs next year like Juuso Välimäki on top of things. Dan Vladar is a big one. And you got Oliver Shillington as well to deal with alongside Mangiapane still in this offseason. But I feel like for Calgary, there's a really good roadmap here to keep Huberdeau, to be able to keep all these guys. And the problem becomes re-signing both Huberdeau and Weeger, because I feel like that might be the biggest roadblock here to keeping Huberdeau in Calgary, is also keeping Weeger on the books too. Again, he's going to want a big raise as well. He'll probably want around $6.5 million on a longer term deal if you really give him what he deserves. And I feel like when you give Huberdeau as well 10.5, that kind of restricts your limits, especially considering that Calgary already had to let go of players like Gaudreau and Tkachuk. But I feel like if they do get rid of Milan Lucic, if that contract's off the books, I feel like it could be manageable for them. But I could also see a situation where they re-sign Mangiapane, they re-sign Shillington, and might have to choose between one of Weeger or Huberdeau, or they keep both and trade somebody else, potentially like a Nikita Zadorov, or maybe even Noah Hanifin if they want to go so crazy. But I do think for Calgary, their situation is rather unique, and they have a bunch of different options. But again, it does feel like maybe the most likely thing to happen here is Huberdeau ends up leaving, whether that be for free agency or the trade deadline this next year. But I will say, him becoming a free agent and at least testing the market, I think is something that's going to happen. Now let's go a year ahead of time. What could happen with Jonathan Huberdeau, and what teams could actually be interested and actually sign him if he does go to free agency, or even if there is a trade potentially? Now, in free agency, I will say this, I think the Montreal Canadiens are a heavy bet to go after him. Of course, I mean, they'll have the cap space by then, especially with what Kent Hughes is trying to do and how many moves he's moving out right now. But there was this quote from Habs Fanatics that they pulled up. This was from last year from Jonathan Huberdeau, and he said this about Montreal. For sure, you wonder if you'll be able to play for Montreal. It's a beautiful city, and that's where I'm from. It's always been a dream to play for Montreal, explained the St. Jerome native. So there you go. I remember this quote last year and thinking not much of it because I didn't really expect Huberdeau to not be a Florida Panther for most of his life. But now that he's a year away from being a UFA, now there's a chance that he doesn't re-sign with the Calgary Flames. What if he ends up going to the Habs and really jump-starting that rebuild well? I mean, this article mentions getting their hands on Pierre-Luc Dubois and Huberdeau. I don't really see that happening. I don't think they can get both of them and be able to make the cap work. I feel like either one would be great, but I feel like Huberdeau fits what the Habs need in the future better, and I think would also be a better leader for a lot of the Habs and a lot of that Habs roster, and I think would also just fit alongside players like Nick Suzuki beautifully, and would also be a little bit of a fixture on that left wing. I mean, imagine a top two 2 left wing core of Jonathan Huberdeau and Juraj Slafkovsky. Absolutely beautiful. But I feel like the Montreal Canadiens are just a great fit for Huberdeau. It likely wouldn't be a trade deadline deal, but if he does go to free agency, if he is available, I feel like the Habs go for Huberdeau instead of Pierre-Luc Dubois, and I feel like that is their big free agent to bring onto the roster. But I feel like there's a lot of teams out there that come trade deadline time could really be in on Jonathan Huberdeau and really want to go after him. I think there's a few teams here that make a lot of sense. I think if the Seattle Kraken are in the playoff hunt and want to take that next step, it would be expensive, but I feel like they could definitely go after him. Of course, we heard in the Matthew Tkachuk situation how they don't want to go after, that he wanted to go to the Vegas Golden Knights. I don't know if the cap will work there, but maybe we see Riley Smith for something go the other way and a couple other assets as well on top of things. I could also see the Dallas Stars, if they want to go for just a pure trade deadline rental player, going after Huberdeau and trying to slot him on that first line left wing as well, or at least that top 6. Of course, they were in on Tkachuk, and reportedly they were close to making a deal happen, but Florida was one of the teams going after it in the end. Other teams I think could work, and the Nashville Predators would be very fun to see with Huberdeau and with that type of talent. The Canes were also going after Matthew Tkachuk. That was interesting. The Columbus Blue Jackets have been making huge moves, but I'm not sure how willing they're going to be to go after another top 6 player. The New Jersey Devils, again, another team that I think will be really interesting. If they do take that next step and if they want another big-time winger, I feel like they might be one of the teams to trade for him and extend him long-term. And I think New Jersey makes a lot of sense. Besides that, I could see maybe the Detroit Red Wings signing him in free agency. Maybe another team like the Sens taking a close look at him if they are going to lose Alex DeBrincat or something crazy. But I feel like those are the teams that make the most sense. There are quite a few teams, though, that I could see a year ahead of time in free agency going after him, like Montreal, like Detroit. But he's going to be one of the most heavily sought-after assets over the next year. There's going to be so many trade rumors surrounding him, and we're just on the tip of the iceberg. Again, going back to this quote, some teams have already inquired about Huberdeau. The day after he was dealt, teams are already doing their due diligence and want to make sure that they can end up getting their hands on him, and you can't blame him. Over 100 points this last year, one of the best passers and offensive power play players in the entire league, and he's going to be a force to be reckoned with if the Calgary Flames do keep him. But I think eventually, man, we're going to see a trade. We could see him go into free agency and likely get a pretty big payday, and it feels like at this point, even though there is a chance that Calgary does re-sign him, it might not be a part of their plan, or it might not be what they try to do. It feels like Huberdeau might just be a stopgap to what comes in the future, whether that be through trade, to get the assets back and to get just more futures. I feel like for Calgary, you bring in Weeger, which is fantastic. You could probably keep him. You could probably keep Huberdeau, but it's one or the other. And I feel like for Calgary, right now they might lean Weeger and make just a flurry of moves in this next year. But that'll be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in and tuning into the breakdown today. So much to talk about with this Matthew Tkachuk deal and with Jonathan Huberdeau's future in Calgary. But let me know in the comments down below, what do you guys think about Jonathan Huberdeau's future? Do you see him being dealt? Where do you see him going? What can you see the trade looking like? Do you think Calgary will trade for him? And what should they get back? And who do you think he signs with in free agency if he's available in 2023? Let me know your thoughts down below. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and click on this card for all of my hockey trade number content right on one playlist. My name is Nathan. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.